Welcome to the Stormsurf video surf forecast for the week starting Sunday, May 31st. First up, we look at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean. We see an area of fetch, actually seas, part of a fetch that was previously off of New Zealand, now repositioned to the Southeast Pacific, with seas near 26 foot, aimed to the northeast. This should produce small swell in the coming days as it builds a little bit more. Otherwise, not a whole lot is going on, but let's take a look at the details, starting with the jet stream level winds. These winds are up about 30,000 feet, help support the formation of storms, and when those storms do form, help direct their track. Currently, we see a split jet stream flow over New Zealand. This supports only high pressure at the surface. Something that almost looks like a trough is trying to develop over the Tasman Sea, and a broader area of almost what could be construed to be a trough is trying to set up in the Southeast Pacific, but it doesn't have really good flow pushing to the north. It is this flow, this sort of an eddy type situation here that would make clockwise circulation, which is low pressure in lower levels of the atmosphere, and that's how waves are generated. Anyway, we have a little bit of a trough here, but winds are very weak. They're only in the about 80 knot range. You really want to see it up around 120 knots to really support storm formation, but it is having some impact because we did see 26-foot seas in this area. Otherwise, not a whole lot going on. A zonal flow in the northern branch of the jet here, with the two branches merging, winds building a little bit here. That's also supporting or helping to support this low pressure here. What is that? About 170 knot winds. So that's not horrible, but you want most of the fetch over here pushing to the north, not flat west to east. Anyway, we put this in motion, see what happens in the coming days, and the trough continues to get a little bit better defined, but still weak winds over in this quadrant of the trough, not really supportive. And then that trough starts to fall apart. Notice it splits. Winds here split and start undercutting whatever trough was there, cutting it off, and that's the end of it. The trough over here tries to develop a little bit more. Not a whole lot of wind energy in this trough, and it's pretty pinched off. And then by Friday, it pretty much shuts down. Notice big ridge building here in the Southeast Pacific. New little trough trying to develop under Tasmania. Maybe into Sunday, and we'll see if that actually comes to pass. But already you can see it's starting to push south, and we just have basically a huge split jet pattern over the entire South Pacific a week out. Not very supportive for storm development. Next up, we look at surface level pressure and surface level winds, and as expected, there was a trough here in the upper atmosphere, and sure enough, low pressure, 972 millibar low, is in position in the Southeast Pacific with 30 to 35 knot southwest winds in play over a pretty good size area, just not strong enough really. Building into Monday, 35 knots now, and aim, look at this, a little bit better to the north, and then pushing even 40 knots later Monday, and a secondary little focus of tiny area, 40 knot winds pushing due north Monday into Tuesday before finally fading out late Tuesday. All this should help generate seas and some swell pushing to the north. Otherwise, as expected, between the split flow, high pressure in play, locking things down. Notice there are winds here southeast of New Zealand, but they're all pushing due south towards Antarctica and the Ross Ice Shelf. No support for storm formation expected there. And that high basically just takes over into Friday and beyond. There we got, looks like 45 knot winds, but watch this, all pretty much just falling straight south into Saturday and next weekend. Nothing really going on. And then more of the same, the jet displaced way to the south with a split flow in control. Also, going back, notice over here in the Tasman Sea, a small little gale develops, 35 knot winds by Monday morning, almost 40 knots there, aimed well to the north. Target would be Fiji, 45 knot winds midday Monday, and continuing into Monday night, and then starting to fade out as the low itself moves over New Zealand. So, swell generation is possible for Fiji, and this is only about 24 hours out from forming, so odds are good that it will happen. So let's see the effect of those winds on the ocean surface in terms of sea generation. And we're going back in time, actually. We're going to Friday a week ago because a system developed southeast of New Zealand. And here we go, 30-foot seas, and then into Sunday, better placed. Notice this, that previous area right there relative to Hawaii was completely shadowed by New Zealand, or just barely moving into the swell window on the 201 degree on Saturday night, and this is relative to Hawaii. And then finally free and clear by Sunday night into Monday, peaking out about midday Monday. Small area, 40-foot seas on the 193 degree path relative to Hawaii, and relative to California, that's about the 208 degree path relative to Northern California, and the 212 degree path relative to Southern California. And then we go one notch beyond. 6 hours later, the system moves north, 40-foot seas in the 211 to 212 degree Great Circle path relative to Northern California, and that is unshadowed by Tahiti. But then for Southern California, about the 211 degree path, and that is shadowed for Southern California. So there's a bit of a difference here. Northern California will get unshadowed energy. Southern California will get shadowed energy. Anyway, that system then proceeded to fade out and dissipate. And then a secondary fetch developed. And this was on Friday. Actually, it started on Thursday. You can see it there. But I mean, we're talking a tiny area of, what is that, 24, 26-foot seas. Still some swell is expected from that. And then we move into the coming week, and here we go. Here's about where we are now. 6-hour forecast, Sunday night. Seas building, and it pushes up a little bit more till about Monday night right here. A small area, 30-foot seas relative to Southern California, 187 degree track, very pretty southerly, and Northern California the same, about 185. Certainly no shadow relative to Tahiti. So it's possible some other swell. And notice the swell angle here, these arrows right here, are almost pushed right up the Great Circle paths. So some more swell, secondary swell, should be expected from this one. So 1 under New Zealand, 2 here. Not a huge one, not strong, but surf nonetheless. And then, of course, we haven't talked about this, but Hurricane Andres here, south of Southern California now. Actually, it peaked out on, I believe that was Friday night into Saturday morning. 100-knot winds, aimed reasonably well to the north. Very southwest angled swell expected for Southern California, arriving on Monday from about 75 degrees relative to Southern California, and 165 relative to Northern California. Only the most exposed breaks in Northern California would see any swell from this. Anyway, let's keep on going here. 30-hour forecast. Andreas fades out. Also, though, continues east. Small swell is expected for Hawaii, too, and we're talking small, nothing significant. Also, here we go. Yet another, the Fiji system will roll this back. So here we are, let's say Monday morning. The system peaks out right about there. Tuesday morning, 30-foot seas. Pushing well towards unobstructed to Fiji, but not a really big system. Still, probably 16, 17 second period swell should result for Fiji, and maybe even a little bit bleed past Fiji into Hawaii, but very small, not a whole lot to take notice of. And now here we go, we're 90 hours out, we're into Thursday. Here's the fetch we saw in the previous charts, generating seas pushing basically towards Antarctica and over Antarctic ice. No real swell generation potential there at all. And that's how we go. We're 180 hours out. Nothing else going on in the South Pacific. Another system forecast here south of Tasmania, but that's still well out of the swell window relative to the U.S. West Coast or even Hawaii at this point in time. And 180 hours out, it's not really believable. But the good news is here, one swell we saw earlier, already starting to impact Hawaii from a system here that was southeast of New Zealand, and another system is forecast in the next 2 days. Nothing huge, but swell nonetheless. And here's another way to look at the wave models. This is all the energy for the entire week on a single chart, so you can sort of see where things are going on. And right now, this was the main area, a small patch. This is composite, all where the 30-foot seas are over an entire week. This system right here, due south of California. That's it. All this energy pushing to the south. Then here's the little Fiji system we saw. Again, not covering a large area. And then the one pushing under Tasmania. So just a different way to look at the models and get a sense of where the activity is expected for the coming week. Relative to the North Pacific, we have Andreas, as we saw before. We'll just put this into motion. You can see how it moves on and fades out into Wednesday. Another system expected forecast forming well south and southeast of Baja, and that system moves into the picture, maybe a little bit more to the west, and maybe not as big. It's way too early to tell. We're talking almost 5 days out here on Friday, but just something to look at. We also can see north winds off of Northern California generating, what is that? Oh, about 14-foot seas on Friday. That's good for wind swell for the Central California coast and probably wrapping into Southern California. Otherwise, not a whole lot expected. There's some activity here off of Japan. This would be late season activity, but seas are not big enough to be of any interest, and that's pretty much it. So at this point in time, we have made the transition. It's all about summertime and southern hemi swells, as it has been for a month or more now, and the North Pacific, for the most part, is asleep. Next up, we start looking at long-term predictors. We've been following the potential development of El Nino. First up, Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Tahiti and Darwin. We had a good run of negative numbers. It looked like El Nino was actually starting to take hold. Certainly, if nothing else, these negative numbers represented a good pulse of the active phase of the MJO, but that has since dissipated. Things are actually moving into the positive territory, which is not good. That suggests the inactive phase of the MJO and not supportive of storm formation. Still, we got so the daily number 4.10. The 30-day running average was pretty negative there, down to minus 17, but now starting to rebound, attributable to positive numbers at minus 13.5. The 90-day average still doing pretty good at minus 9.37. It was at about minus 8 starting mid-October last year, has bumped up some from there, but now we're back in the negative 8 category, suggestive of very, very weak El Nino conditions. And here's another way to view the 30-day SOI average in historical context, going back, better part of 2 years here. But you can see where we are. Right now, we're rebounding from that up around minus 15 or so, minus 16. This is still way further negative than we've been in 2 years and probably the better part of 4 years. So this is a good sign. This suggests we're certainly nowhere near La Nina. Certainly bordering, if we could stay down in here, then we're well into El Nino territory. But we expect this to return to a more normal value rather quickly. Next up, we take a look at wind deviations from normal. That is, wind direction and speed for this time of year in these locations of the ocean. And specifically, we're looking here from the area from about 140 east to about 170 west, the Kelvin wave generation area. We see weak westerly anomalies. If they were stronger, that's probably enough to still continue warm water flowing down to depth, trying to support Kelvin wave development, but not particularly strong. And if anything, we almost see borderline weak easterly anomalies trying to develop here more over the core of the maritime continent. Anyway, looking to the east, we see strong westerly anomalies, well, moderate actually, from about a point south of Hawaii to a point south of California. One would go, oh, that would be good for supporting Kelvin wave formation. But the reality is, once you get east of about 170, it does nothing for Kelvin wave development. It's good for moving warm water on the surface to the east, which is another component of El Nino, but does not support the Kelvin wave component. And certainly helps support tropical storm formation as well. But what this looks like is the active phase of the MJO is progressing from the West Pacific. We had a lot of westerly anomalies the whole month of May, and that is moving to the east, and the expectation is it will fade in time. Looking a week out, we do in fact see easterly anomalies developing. This is kind of not what we were hoping for. This is the first projected area of easterly anomalies in a very long time. The entire year we've had nothing but westerly anomalies, and now we enter the first week of June, and easterly anomalies are forecast to set up, at least on this chart, up at the 850 millibar level. That's up about 4,000 feet in the air. We'll have to see what actually develops down at the surface. But for now, easterly anomalies projected. The Kelvin wave generation area starts anywhere right in this area. And notice here, westerly anomalies continue, though, over the date line, and then also south of Hawaii to about, not even about 140 or so. Also note this, strong westerly anomalies over the Galapagos Islands. Typically, you have trades blowing here, the exact opposite direction. So this is interesting, an interesting component. But again, the thought is this is some sort of a active-like phase, perhaps El Nino related. Hard to say at this point in time, because most of the charts show no MJO activity in this area. So we'll leave it ambiguous at this point in time, but still, westerly anomalies over the Galapagos Island, significant and something to watch. Put in context, here we go. So roughly West Pacific here, East Pacific here. This is the whole planet. The reds and oranges are westerly anomalies, the blue easterly anomalies. We want westerly anomalies. We want them in the West Pacific. And here we go, early part of May, strong westerly wind burst right in the heart of the Kelvin wave generation area is helping to feed more Kelvin wave development. And then we get into the end of May, and here we go. This is westerly anomalies, but over in the far, south of California. Nothing in terms of supporting Kelvin wave development. And here we go. Here's the westerly anomalies that are forecast. The Galapagos would be off over in here somewhere, and south of Hawaii. So we'll see what actually happens. But here is your easterly anomalies forecast in the Kelvin wave generation area a week out. Looking at outgoing long wave radiation, in fact, here you see a little area of these are outgoing long wave radiation anomalies. That is clouds blocking. The blues are negative anomalies, clouds blocking sunlight reflectivity off the ocean surface, suggestive of precipitation. But clearly here is what appears to be the inactive phase of the MJO already taking root per the statistic model in the West Pacific, and expected to work their way east in this model, fading. But in the dynamic model, an uglier picture setting up with the inactive phase, in fact, building and covering a good size area. This would certainly shut down westerly anomalies, and that's sort of what the charts are all showing. So our expectation is some degree of easterly anomalies developing this about a week out, peaking out maybe eight days or so from yesterday. So a week from now we'll be in the worst of it. And if that's all that happens, that's not bad. But what this sort of suggests is not real favorable in support of El Nino development, a pause. And this is what started happening last year, the same time. We had massive Kelvin wave hit. We thought we were in the money for El Nino development, and then we started getting things like this happening, and it sort of just stomped on the whole thing and shut it down. So unknown where we're going to be this year. Things seem to be more ground in atmospherically, and there seems to be a better upper level pattern in place already, especially given the number of southern hemi swells we've had in pushing into California this year. But nothing is guaranteed. And finally, the 40-day model. This is up at the jet stream level, but again, these the oranges and yellows suggest areas not favorable for precipitation, and also suggest the inactive phase of the MJO. Notice here, area favorable for precipitation in the far East Pacific. This would be the active phase moving out over the next through June 10th as the inactive phase builds, works its way across the Pacific pretty much through the 25th of June. And then you get this kind of broad, ill-defined I don't even know that we'd call it an active phase, just a sort of bias towards the in favor of precipitation, and this looks more like an El Nino type pattern, but hard to say. Certainly would not believe a model that is forecasting things a month or more out into the future, but it gives you a reference point. Next up, sea surface temperature anomalies from 528. Nice area, warm water building in the Galapagos along Peru. And one would say, if you compare this, we've done this the past couple weeks, compared it to the 97 El Nino, compared it to last year's supposed El Nino, this looks very favorable if it were to continue to bloom. But we have data that suggests that this is a Kelvin wave upwelling in this area, peaking out, and we've seen data now that suggests that this is the peak of the event. This is as much as going to happen. Now, there's still a fair amount of warm water below the surface, but at least at this moment, this area is not getting any warmer. We also see warm water advecting off to the west, creating a nice El Nino signal here. So really you want warm waters right in about this area here. It's the Nino 3.4 region that goes from 170 west to about 120 right in here. That's where you need your peak warming. It starts here, works its way off, surface winds, trades blow it into this area, and if you have warm water in this area, then you're certainly in El Nino. You can also see upwelling along the California coast due to a lot of northerly winds that's been going on for almost a month, but still piles of warm water elsewhere in this area, certainly fueling the tropics. One system we already talked about has developed here in the East Pacific, another forecast form. We also had two recurving tropical systems earlier in the month off of Japan. They didn't go anywhere. It's much too early in the season. Not till the fall would it really get interesting. But the fact that they even recurve at all suggests that the atmosphere is turning more towards El Nino. Whether we're over the threshold enough to really get a solid El Nino, it's too early to know. But anyway, warm pattern looking fairly good here. So here is the peak of the warm waters. This occurred on May 24th. See a good area, nice warm water here. This is 4 to 5 degrees above normal in this area, the Nino 1.2 region. And then we come along 2 days later and you see it already shrinking. So we'll go back and forth here. You can see it clearly happening. And we have other data that basically is correlating or confirming the same cooling in this area. It's kind of surprising. We're not sure exactly what is going on, but there's a major Kelvin wave erupting in this area, and these temperatures should be holding on the surface, but they're not. Here is another view of the, here's actual water temperatures, actual wind speeds. Notice just tiny little bits of actual westerly winds here in the Kelvin wave generation area, and then anomalies here, water temperature anomalies and wind direction and speed. Clearly westerly anomalies all through the Kelvin wave generation area. This was as of yesterday, and working their way to a point about south of Hawaii. Notice 1.5 degree anomalies right here, pretty much filling the Nino 3.4 region per this image. And this is solid. This looks impressive. And you go, we're on our way to El Nino. But the temperature thing off of Peru is a little bit concerning. The issue here is when you get into looking at these at the daily level, there's a lot of noise. Things happen. The ocean is very dynamic, and sometimes you need a week or 2 or 3 weeks of data to really see if a trend is developing and to wipe out some of the noise and get over that. But at this point in time, we're thinking the cooling water temperatures off Peru are legitimate. At the subsurface level, here is actual water temperatures, and you notice a good area of warm water here, even in the subsurface. This is the West Pacific, this is the East Pacific, and at depth. It's the anomalies that we're really interested in. And like we were saying before, there's piles of warm anomalies here. Here's our Kelvin wave, the original Kelvin wave. There's more warm water falling to depth, building yet another we'd like to call it a separate Kelvin wave, but it's not. It's just tagging onto the existing Kelvin wave. Is going to keep that upwelling warm water going on over the Galapagos, which is exactly what you want to see relative to El Nino and a strong El Nino if it were going to form. And 5-degree anomalies here, and they're just gurgling up. They should be gurgling up to the surface. Notice this. We're not even to the Galapagos Islands. Well, just about. The Galapagos would be right about here. In this chart. And so there's piles of warm water here. The fact that the water temperatures are cooling even a little bit, about a degree at the surface, is just kind of a head scratcher. We're not sure what's going on, but again, we'll attribute it to noise for the moment. Certainly not the upwelling phase of the Kelvin wave cycle. There's no cool water here anywhere to be seen, but the atmosphere is sort of acting like it wants to do that, that it wants to go into a inactive phase of the MJO. Clearly, we saw that on the models. But at this point in time, it appears to be having no subsurface effect. This other model here, which goes a little bit further to the west, but again, this is as of May 23rd. This was right about the time that the Kelvin wave was peaking out. But still, there's piles of warm water here. Here's the next Kelvin wave, or the next warm water from westerly anomalies that occurred in May, already showing up on the chart. I mean, there's 3 months of warm water primed here. So we're let's say June 1st to July to August through September. There's warm water that's going to continue to gurgle up off the in the area of the Galapagos and Ecuador. So we're not so concerned, but the game we're playing here is we want to see the pipe continue to be full, continue to have westerly anomalies, continue to pump warm water to the east. That would help set us up for a significant El Nino. And we'll just have to wait and see. There's no telling what's going to happen. And finally, upper ocean heat anomalies. So this is the West Pacific. This is the East Pacific. This is water temperatures in the upper 300 meters of the ocean. And here we are last year, June, same time frame. We had a big Kelvin wave had developed earlier in the year, worked its way over to the Galapagos. Exact same scenarios like where we were in this year. Then there was this definitely upwelling phase of the Kelvin wave cycle. Cool water filled the pipe, and then finally, sometime in the August timeframe, we started again with 2 more Kelvin waves, very weak at that, and then an upwelling phase. Here we are now in this year's Kelvin wave. It peaked out right about here, right about now. Well, we're saying May 24th or so is what it looks like, but we shouldn't be going into just out-and-out cool waters, and we're not saying that we are. We're just saying the peak has occurred. Water temperatures are backing off, but you can clearly see there's piles of warm water in the pipe here still, and that's going to continue to gurgle up, just not as warm as what we have been seeing the past, let's say, week or 2. And then finally, the prediction from the CFS version 2 model, and notice this is PDF corrected. We had been showing you a chart. It was raw data, and it was very spiky. It was showing something up like nearly 3-degree anomalies, but those weren't correct. The corrected data is a more realistic view. Anyway, so we changed this chart out on the ENSO Power tool, and we're talking about it here now. This is just a more realistic view, and as always, we try to be a little bit on the conservative side, and we try to give the realistic picture, not overhype things. Anyway, here we are, 1-degree anomalies. Right now per the model, slowly building into July, predicted about was at 1.3, working their way up into about 1.6 by October, peaking out maybe 1.75 or so, maybe 1.8 in the November timeframe. A 1.8 El Nino would 1.8 degree El Nino would be a solid El Nino, not over the top. The big one in 97 was like a 2.2 or so, even higher. And so this would fall into the moderate El Nino category if it were to occur. And notice also, here's actual CDAS Nino 3.4 temperature values for the whole region. Currently about 1.1 degrees, which tracks very well with what we saw on the projection from the model right now. So we're on track. Notice there's a lot of noise in here. It's not this straight line, gradual increase in temperatures. You can see here, there's a lot of noise, even within the 2 or 3 day range, and this is not unusual. Winds blowing over the area can create surface temperature variation, wind waves, sort of stirs it up, cools things down for a little bit, and then when the winds back off, some of the temperatures creep back up. So at this point in time, we'll say that's what's going on in the Galapagos area. Local winds, maybe dropping temperatures a little bit, but we also expect those temperatures to again build in the Nino 1.2 region near the Galapagos, and our El Nino to continue on track. So to wrap things up, swell in the water coming from the south, currently hitting Hawaii, working its way towards California midweek. Nothing huge. Decent size for Hawaii. Significant class swell expected there. Small significant class swell. Nothing that large for California, but still rideable, fun-sized surf. We've actually been having a great run of small southern hemi swells. That is to continue. And then a second pulse expected beyond that if we get a little bit of a gale that forms in the southeast Pacific here in the coming 2 days. Meantime, El Nino continues to develop. Little bit of uncertainty around things that are going on in the Galapagos right now, but probably nothing too significant at this point in time. We don't see anything that suggests it's the inactive phase or the upwelling phase of the Kelvin wave cycle, though there is the inactive phase, the MJO, that is building for the next week in the West Pacific. So we'll keep our eyes on that. Hopefully that won't create easterly anomalies down at the surface in that area, and will continue to feed the warm water pipe. So all in all, things looking very good. We'll do this again next week, same time, same channel. See you then.